You live trapped in a simulation. But it is not technological. It is a mental simulation built by your own limiting beliefs that projects scarcity and suffering where there could be abundance. In 1949, Goddard proved that you are not a victim of circumstances, but the unconscious creator of every limitation that you experience. The prison is your state of unconsciousness about how reality actually works. You think in 3 dimensions while consciousness operates in 4. Every financial problem, every illness, and every loneliness exists because you navigate unconsciously between states of consciousness, always choosing the same patterns of scarcity. 4th dimensional thinking reveals that all states, poverty and wealth, illness and health, coexist now, and you are selecting which one to experience through your imagination. Escaping this simulation does not mean fleeing to another place, but awakening to your power as a creator within this same reality. You have always had total control of the projection of your consciousness. You have simply forgotten how to use that control.
The persistent feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with reality is not paranoia or existential dissatisfaction. It is consciousness trying to alert you that you are operating with only 3 dimensions in a universe that functions with 4. While your senses insist that the physical world is solid and unchangeable, your imagination knows that everything could be completely different in an instant. This discrepancy between what you feel is possible and what the world presents as real is the first sign that a prison exists. But the bars are not made of matter. They are constructed by the insistence on thinking only through length, width, and depth. Time, which seems to flow from the past to the future, is actually the 4th dimension being experienced in a distorted way by a 3-dimensional mind. When you imagine something vividly, where exactly does this happen? Not in the physical brain, which is just another 3-dimensional object. The imagination operates in the 4th dimension, that psychological space where all possibilities coexist before being selected for manifestation in the world of the senses. Every person accesses this realm dozens of times per day, but immediately returns to 3-dimensional thinking by classifying their imaginary visions as fantasies inferior to reality. 4th-dimensional thinking reveals that the physical world is the effect, not the cause. It is the shadow projected by events that occur first in the dimension of imaginative consciousness. The simulation is not technological, it is perceptual. You are trapped not by external forces, but by the very way you were taught to process experience. Liberation begins when you understand that you can operate consciously in that dimension where the impossible is just another accessible coordinate. The human mind processes reality like an ant navigating on a sheet of paper. It knows perfectly the movement forward, backward, and to the sides, but the vertical dimension remains completely outside of its conception. This limitation is not biological or neurological. It is a perceptual choice that we make thousands of times per day without realizing it. 3-dimensional thinking organizes all experience within a rigid structure. Objects occupy defined space, events follow inflexible causal sequences, and time marches inexorably from the past through the present toward the future. This mental architecture seems so natural that questioning it sounds like madness, but it is precisely this apparent naturalness that constitutes the invisible walls of the prison. Consider how you experience a memory. In 3-dimensional thinking, it is behind you in time, fixed and unchangeable. Now consider how you experience a desire. It is ahead, waiting for time and the right circumstances to bring it to you. This linear geometry is a construction, not a universal law. In the 4th dimension, past and future are just different coordinates in the same present field of consciousness. Neville Goddard demonstrated that when we think 4-dimensionally, we discover that we are not moving through time. Time is a 3-dimensional interpretation of movement through states of consciousness. It is like watching a movie frame by frame versus seeing all the frames simultaneously on a single surface. The three-dimensional person sees only one frame at a time and calls this the present. Four-dimensional consciousness sees the entire movie as a single object and can focus on any frame at will. The mental cube in which we inhabit has 6 well-defined faces. Above is the impossible, below the probable, ahead the future, behind the past, and on the sides the imaginary and the real. We move within this cube believing that these directions are absolute, when in truth they are merely conventions of a mind that has forgotten how to think beyond 3 dimensions. The 4th dimension is not adding one more spatial direction to our world. It is the realm where all possible configurations of 3-dimensional space exist simultaneously. Imagine a book. In 3 dimensions, you must turn page by page sequentially. In the 4th dimension, all pages exist open simultaneously, and you can access anyone instantly. Your 3-dimensional life is like being trapped on a specific page, forgetting that the entire book is available. When you close your eyes and imagine being in another place, what exactly happens? Your physical body remained in the same 3-dimensional location, but your consciousness accessed different coordinates in the 4th dimension. The error lies in classifying one experience as real and the other as imaginary, when both are equally valid in their respective dimensions. The imagination is not an escape from reality, it is literal dimensional navigation. The architect who designs only in 3 dimensions is limited by the laws of physics, gravity, material resistance, and structural forces. But the dimensional architect who understands the 4th dimension designs directly in the field of consciousness, where the only limitations are those that he accepts. It is not about violating physical laws, but about operating from a point where these laws are just one among infinite possibilities for organizing experience. The most elaborate prison is the one where the prisoner becomes the jailer. Every time you say, "This is impossible," or "reality doesn't work like that," you are reinforcing the walls of the 3-dimensional cube. Every time you accept the linear sequence of cause and effect as the only form of possible change, you are tightening your own shackles. Freedom will not come from someone opening the door. It will come from realizing that the door only exists in 3-dimensional thinking. 4th-dimensional thinking reveals that all states of consciousness, poverty and wealth, illness and health, loneliness and companionship exist simultaneously in the eternal now of the 4th dimension. The 3-dimensional person believes they must travel from one state to another through effort and time. But these states are not separated by distance or time. They are separated only by frequency of consciousness. Changing states is like changing radio stations. All stations are broadcasting now. You just tune into one at a time. The first key to escaping this simulation is recognizing its nature. The solid and fixed world that your senses report is only an infinitesimally thin slice of a much broader dimensional spectrum. It is like confusing a single note with the entire symphony, or a single color with the entire light spectrum. The physical world continues to exist and remains important, but it loses its tyrannical power when you discover that you can access it and modify it from a higher dimension, the dimension of conscious imagination, where the 3-dimensional geometry of cause and effect does not limit you. This discovery is just the beginning, but what keeps us so firmly trapped in this dimensional limitation? There exists a force that operates on your consciousness in the same way that gravity acts on physical objects. Every absolute certainty that you carry adds psychological mass to your being, increasing the attraction that keeps you fixed to the 3-dimensional plane of perception. Observe how certain ideas carry tangible weight. I need to work hard to succeed. The past determines who I am. changes take time. These beliefs function as gravitational anchors that prevent consciousness from naturally floating to the fourth dimension. The greater your conviction in them, the denser the gravitational field becomes around you. Social conditioning operates as a psychological particle accelerator. Each human interaction adds speed and mass to the collectively accepted limitations. When thousands of people share an impossibility, they create a gravitational field so intense that questioning such a limitation requires extraordinary effort. Innovators and visionaries frequently work in isolation because they need to temporarily escape this collective field to access possibilities that others cannot even conceive. Neville Goddard identified this phenomenon when observing how different people experience varying degrees of ease when manifesting changes. Those who carry fewer certainties about how reality works navigate between states of consciousness with surprising fluidity. Those overburdened with knowledge about the limitations of the world remain trapped by excess mental weight. The child who has not yet learned the concept of impossibility imagines being a bird and genuinely experiences the sensation of flying. She accesses coordinates in the fourth dimension where she is a bird. The adult, loaded with the weight of their biological certainties, has lost access to that coordinate. Their psychological weight anchors them to a single interpretation of reality. Formal education functions as a program of systematic weight addition. Every fact learned about natural laws, every impossibility catalogued, and every limitation accepted increases psychological density. The expert in physics carries so much mental weight about the laws of the universe that experiencing anything outside these parameters becomes practically inaccessible. Their knowledge has transformed into a gravitational prison. This weight concentrates disproportionately in certain areas of life. Money, health, and relationships accumulate extreme density. People carry psychological tons of established truths. Money requires sacrifice. Genetics determines health. True love is rare. Each certainty functions like a miniature black hole, curving the psychological space around it and creating inescapable orbits. Developing mental lightness means recognizing that the apparent rules of the physical world are valid only within the specific gravitational field of three-dimensional thinking. An astronaut operates in an environment where Earth's gravity does not possess absolute dominion. The four-dimensional thinker operates from a point where physical appearances do not determine the available possibilities. You yourself generate the gravitational field that traps you. Each limitation affirmed as truth increases your density. Each impossibility accepted adds mass to the force that keeps you on the ground of consciousness. The system self-perpetuates. The prisoner constantly strengthens their own chains, calling this realism or prudence. Transcendence of this gravity begins with a deliberate process of loosening. Each certainty needs to be recognized as a choice of perspective, not as cosmic law. This is so transforms into, I experience this so at this moment. This subtle shift removes the absolutist weight from beliefs, transforming stones into fluid possibilities. Fourth-dimensional thinking operates in the recognition that all possibilities coexist simultaneously. Any certainty about impossibilities reveals itself as an arbitrary choice. When you understand this experientially, you begin to float above the plane where humanity remains glued. Psychological levitation happens naturally when you stop carrying unnecessary baggage about what can or cannot be. The most trapped people are frequently the most educated in the conventional sense. They know so many reasons why things cannot change that they have become immobile. Meanwhile, those considered naive or dreamers often manifest the impossible simply because no one convinced them that they could not. They operate with reduced psychological gravity, not through ignorance, but through refusal to accept the weight of consensual limitations. Mastery arises when you learn to add or remove psychological weight consciously, adjusting your density as needed. In the three-dimensional world, you can choose to operate with enough weight to appear normal. In four-dimensional navigation, you release all unnecessary weight and float freely between possibilities. This capacity to consciously modulate your psychological gravity is the second key to escaping the simulation. Now the question arises, how do we make transparent the walls that seem so opaque and solid? Three-dimensional consciousness inhabits a cube where it can only perceive the internal surfaces. Each face of this cube represents a fundamental barrier: past versus future, possible versus impossible, real versus imaginary. The practice of dimensional transparency consists of making these surfaces progressively permeable until they cease to obstruct perception. Close your eyes and visualize yourself inside a completely closed room. The walls are your beliefs about the nature of reality. The ceiling is the limit of what you consider possible. The floor is the base of what you accept as concrete and unchangeable. Now understand, these barriers exist only in three-dimensional perception. In the fourth dimension, you are already simultaneously inside and outside this room. The fundamental exercise of dimensional transparency begins with the temporal wall. Most people experience the past as a solid wall behind them, impenetrable and definitive. Four-dimensional thinking reveals that this wall is a projection. You can pass through it not by going back in time, but by changing your dimensional relationship with the events. What seemed to be a fixed barrier becomes a membrane through which consciousness can flow freely. Neville Goddard described this process as developing psychological peripheral vision. Just as your physical eyes can expand the visual field to capture movement at the extremities, your consciousness can expand to perceive multiple realities simultaneously. You maintain focus on the three-dimensional world while remaining aware of the infinite variations that exist in the dimensional periphery. Consider how you normally experience a decision. There is the chosen path and the rejected paths. In three-dimensional thinking, the rejected paths cease to exist at the moment of choice. In four-dimensional perception, all paths continue to exist. You have simply focused your attention on one of them. The other possibilities remain accessible in the periphery of your consciousness, waiting only for an adjustment of focus to become primary. Dissolution does not mean destroying the structures of physical reality. The walls of the mental cube continue serving a function. They organize experience into comprehensible patterns. Mastery lies in recognizing these walls as optional tools, not obligatory prisons. You can choose when to use them and when to transcend them. The practical process involves systematically questioning every barrier that arises in experience. When you encounter an impossibility, instead of accepting it or fighting it, you examine its structure. What is this wall made of? Who built it? What function does it serve? Frequently, you will discover that the barrier is maintained only by the habit of perceiving it as solid. A concrete example: someone believes they cannot change careers because they have financial responsibilities. This is a wall in the mental cube. Dimensional transparency does not deny the responsibilities, nor fantasize about them disappearing. Instead, it reveals that there exist infinite configurations where the responsibilities are met through different paths. The wall remains, but becomes transparent. You see through it all the possibilities that exist on the other side. The closed room of three-dimensional consciousness reveals itself as a theatrical stage. What seemed to be fixed walls are movable sets that can be rearranged. What seemed to be the ceiling is just a painted cloth. The limitations that you experienced were scenic elements necessary for the specific play that you were performing. When you understand this, you can rewrite the script and reorganize the scenery. The daily practice of dimensional transparency develops a specific quality of attention. You learn to maintain simultaneous awareness of multiple levels of reality. While conversing with someone on the three-dimensional level, you remain conscious of all the alternative versions of this conversation occurring in parallel dimensions. While facing a problem in the physical world, you simultaneously perceive all the realities where this problem has already been solved. This is not dissociation or escape from reality. It is an expansion of reality to include its complete dimensions. The person who practices dimensional transparency becomes more effective in the three-dimensional world, not less, because they operate with complete information about the available possibilities. It is like playing chess, being able to see not just the current board, but all the possible boards that can emerge from each move. The initial resistance comes from the conditioned mind that insists that the walls are necessary for sanity. If everything is possible, nothing has meaning, argues three-dimensional thinking. But four-dimensional experience reveals the opposite. When everything is possible, each choice gains profound meaning because it is selected from an infinite field, not forced by arbitrary limitations. The decisive moment occurs when you realize that you have always had the capacity to dissolve walls. You had just forgotten. Every barrier that seemed insurmountable was held in place by your own fixed gaze upon it. The instant that you shift your dimensional gaze, expanding perception to include what is beyond, the wall loses substance. It continues to exist for those who look only in 3 dimensions, but for you, it has become optional. Gradually, the walls of the mental cube become so transparent that you forget they exist. You navigate freely between dimensions of possibility, choosing which reality to experience based on conscious preference, not on perceived limitation. This is the state that Goddard called natural habitation in the 4th dimension. But how exactly do we navigate through time when the temporal barriers dissolve? Time functions as a malleable surface that 4-dimensional consciousness can fold and manipulate. Visualize a sheet of paper where each point represents a specific moment. In 3-dimensional thinking, you walk laboriously from point to point, carrying the accumulated weight of each step. In 4-dimensional thinking, you fold the sheet, making any point touch any other instantly. The past possesses power over you only as long as you maintain the linear geometry of time. Every traumatic memory, every failure, and every regret exists at specific coordinates on this temporal sheet. The 3-dimensional person believes they must carry these coordinates in sequence, like train cars that cannot be uncoupled. The 4-dimensional thinker understands that they can simply exit the train and observe it from a higher dimensional perspective. Neville Goddard demonstrated that when you fold psychological time-space, you do not alter the events that occurred. You change your dimensional position in relation to them. A mountain seems insurmountable when you are at its base. Viewed from an airplane, it reveals itself as just a small elevation in a vast landscape. The trauma that seemed to define your entire life shows itself as a single point in an infinite field when observed from the 4th dimension. The specific technique involves accessing the emotional state of the desired result before the 3-dimensional conditions justify it. You inhabit the end before the middle has occurred. Someone who desires prosperity does not wait to become rich to feel prosperous. They access the 4-dimensional coordinates of prosperity now, folding the time between the current state and the desired state until they touch. This process differs radically from positive thinking or creative visualization. You are not imagining a better future while remaining anchored in an unsatisfactory present. You are literally changing your temporal coordinates, inhabiting a different point on the time-space sheet. Your physical body continues in the same 3-dimensional location, but your consciousness operates at completely different temporal coordinates. Consider how you experience a painful memory. It seems fixed in the past, unchangeable, determining your present through an inflexible causal chain. Now understand, this memory exists only at a specific point on the temporal sheet. When you fold the sheet, you can make your present directly touch any other point, completely ignoring the traumatic memory. It continues to exist at those coordinates, but loses all causal influence over your current experience. The common error is trying to heal the past or rewrite it positively. These approaches keep you trapped in linear geometry, just trying to rearrange the train cars. Temporal folding completely transcends this structure. You do not need to fix the past because it only possesses substance in three-dimensional geometry. In the fourth dimension, it is just one point among infinite others, without special power over any other point. The practice requires specific discipline. Every time a justification based on the past arises, I am like this because that happened, you recognize this as three-dimensional navigation. Then you deliberately fold time, accessing a state where that event possesses no causal connection with your present state. You choose your temporal coordinates based on preference, not on historical sequence. Goddard observed that people who transcend apparently impossible limitations invariably operate in this way. They do not fight their past, nor try to overcome it through gradual effort. They simply change dimensions, inhabiting temporal coordinates where the limitations never existed. The alcoholic who stops instantly has not beaten the addiction. They have folded time to inhabit coordinates where they were never an alcoholic. The resistance comes from the educated mind that insists on the sanctity of temporal sequence. Cause must precede effect. The past must determine the present. Changes must occur gradually. These rules are valid only in three-dimensional thinking. In the fourth dimension, effect can precede cause, the future can determine the past, and changes can be instantaneous because time is not a line, but a surface that can be navigated in any direction. The practical example: someone grew up in poverty and carries this programming. In the linear model, they must work for years to overcome this programming through effort and time. In temporal folding, they immediately access the coordinates, where they have always had prosperity consciousness. They do not deny their three-dimensional history, but operate from a dimensional point where this history does not determine their possibilities. Mastery arises when you can fold and unfold time consciously, navigating between temporal configurations as appropriate. In practical situations that require a linear sequence, you operate in three-dimensional mode. For fundamental transformations, you fold time and directly access the desired state. This temporal flexibility is the fourth key to escaping the simulation. The final secret of temporal folding: all moments exist simultaneously in the fourth dimension. Past, present, and future are arbitrary divisions created by three-dimensional perception. When you truly understand this, time loses its tyrannical power. You are no longer trapped in a single sequence, but free to inhabit any moment in any order. This temporal freedom opens the even more radical possibility: inhabiting multiple times simultaneously. The supreme secret of four-dimensional thinking lies in the capacity to exist at multiple temporal coordinates at the same time. You maintain operational consciousness in the three-dimensional present while completely inhabiting the chosen future in the fourth dimension. This temporal simultaneity destroys the tyranny of waiting and dissolves the concept of gradual process. Neville Goddard discovered that all possible future states already exist as accessible coordinates in the fourth dimension. The person who will be a millionaire, the you who has found love, the healed version of any illness, all these realities exist now, complete and available. Three-dimensional thinking insists that you must travel to these coordinates through linear time. Four-dimensional thinking reveals that you can inhabit them immediately. Visualize yourself as a cosmic chess player sitting before multiple simultaneous boards. Each board represents a different timeline. While you move a piece on the board of the present, you are already playing on the board of the desired future. Moreover, you experience the victory on that future board while still executing the necessary moves on the present board. Conscious dimensional navigation operates through a specific mechanism. When you close your eyes and assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you are not fantasizing or pretending. You are adjusting your consciousness coordinates to include that specific reality in your field of experience. Your body remains at the current three-dimensional coordinates, but your consciousness operates simultaneously at the coordinates of fulfillment. The concrete example: someone desires a specific house. The three-dimensional method involves working, saving, searching, and negotiating, a linear sequence of events that can take years. The four-dimensional method involves mentally inhabiting the house now, not visualizing it externally, but experiencing yourself inside it. Sleeping in its bed, waking in its room, living your daily routine from those coordinates. This dimensional habitation creates a pressure in the fabric of reality that reorganizes three-dimensional events to correspond to the four-dimensional experience. The crucial difference lies in the quality of habitation. Most people briefly visit the desired future through imagination, then return completely to the unsatisfactory present. This is dimensional tourism, not habitation. True habitation means maintaining constant residence at the desired coordinates while your physical body continues operating in the present. You live in two times simultaneously. Goddard identified that the rules of deserving and preparation are purely three-dimensional constructs. In the fourth dimension, you do not need to deserve your chosen coordinates any more than you need to deserve to imagine. If you can conceive a state, you can inhabit it. If you can inhabit it in consciousness, you can manifest it in form. The time interval between mental habitation and physical manifestation is just the period necessary for the three-dimensional elements to reorganize themselves. The process works like tuning multiple radio stations simultaneously. Initially, there is static and interference. The frequencies mix chaotically. With practice, you develop the capacity to isolate and amplify the desired frequency while maintaining awareness of the others. Eventually, you can instantly alternate between frequencies or maintain them all in peripheral consciousness. Resistance arises because the physical brain, being a three-dimensional organ, protests against temporal simultaneity. It was designed to process linear sequences, not parallel experiences. But consciousness is not limited by the brain. It uses the brain as an instrument, but operates beyond its structural limitations. When you understand this distinction, multiple habitation becomes natural. People who manifest seemingly impossible changes invariably report the same experience. They were living in the result before it appeared. They were not waiting or wishing, they were inhabiting. The bankrupt businessman who became a millionaire was already experiencing himself as rich while the bills were piling up. The terminally ill person who healed was already feeling completely healthy while the symptoms persisted. They were inhabiting two temporal coordinates simultaneously until three-dimensional reality aligned with the four-dimensional. The specific technique involves what Goddard called thinking from the end, not of the end. You do not observe the desired future from afar. You position yourself within it and observe the present from that perspective. How would you see your current situation if you were already living your ideal? What memory would this moment be when viewed from the fulfilled future? This perspective inversion is the key to true habitation. Mastery arises when you can inhabit not just two, but multiple temporal coordinates. You maintain simultaneous consciousness of various versions of yourself in different timelines. The artist who is also an entrepreneur, the father who is also an adventurer, the mystic who is also a scientist. All these versions coexist in your expanded consciousness. You choose which to express moment by moment, but all remain accessible. The crucial point: you are not attracting the future to the present. You are expanding your consciousness to include the future in your perpetual now. Physical manifestation is simply the three-dimensional world adjusting to reflect where your consciousness already resides. The more complete the mental habitation, the faster the physical correspondence. This capacity to inhabit multiple times simultaneously is the fifth key to transcending the simulation. But the final awakening requires something even more radical. Each state of consciousness literally constitutes a complete universe with its own laws, possibilities, and limitations. You do not inhabit a single reality from which you need to escape, but constantly navigate between infinite parallel universes through each change in your consciousness. The final awakening happens when you recognize yourself as the conscious navigator, not the unconscious passenger. Neville Goddard revealed that each alteration of mood, each change of perspective, and each decision made is a quantum leap to a slightly different parallel universe. The depressed person and the joyful person are not in the same universe experiencing different emotions. They are in completely distinct universes where the very laws of reality operate differently. In the universe of depression, opportunities are rare and obstacles are abundant. In the universe of joy, synchronicities arise naturally and doors open spontaneously. Most people make these dimensional jumps unconsciously, prisoners of the illusion of linear continuity. They believe they are in the same world, changing gradually, when in reality they are jumping between parallel worlds billions of times per day. Each thought is a dimensional coordinate. Each feeling is a universal address. Each belief is a map to a specific cosmos. The conscious navigator deliberately chooses which universe to inhabit moment by moment. They understand that poverty and wealth are not conditions within the same world. They are different worlds. Illness and health are not opposite states in the same reality. They are distinct parallel realities. Love and loneliness are not varied experiences in the same universe. They are separate universes with completely different emotional physics. When you awaken to this conscious navigation, you realize that you have always had the power to change universes, but were hypnotized by the apparent solidity of a single world. It is like discovering that what you thought was a prison is actually a station with infinite trains, constantly departing for different destinations. You have always been free to board any of them, but you stood still on the platform, believing that was the only existing place. The specific technique involves what Goddard called psychological movement. You feel the internal shift before any external evidence. When you change from the universe of scarcity to the universe of abundance, there is a tangible sensation of displacement, like crossing an invisible membrane. You know you have changed universes because everything seems subtly different, even though the physical objects appear the same. The secret lies in understanding that you do not need to fix the current universe. You can simply shift to one where the problem does not exist. The person in debt does not need to pay the debts in the universe of scarcity. They can jump to the universe of prosperity where the debts are resolved through means that did not exist in the previous universe. The sick person does not need to heal the illness in the universe of sickness. They can migrate to the universe of health where the illness never had real substance. Each universe has its own internal logic, its own sequence of cause and effect. In the universe where you are rich, there exists a logical history of how the wealth arrived. In the universe where you are healthy, there is a rational explanation for the healing. These histories form retroactively at the moment of the dimensional jump. The past reorganizes itself to support the chosen present. Resistance comes from the fear of losing identity. People cling to the familiar universe even when it is painful because they confuse familiarity with identity. They believe that changing universes means ceasing to be themselves. But you are not the universe you inhabit, you are the traveler who crosses through it. Your essence remains while the scenarios change. The experienced dimensional traveler develops the capacity to maintain awareness of multiple universes simultaneously. While operating in the universe necessary for practical matters, they maintain peripheral access to universes of expanded possibilities. It is like having a passport to an infinite number of countries while maintaining temporary residence in a specific one. The supreme freedom is not in finding the correct or true universe. All are equally valid, equally real within their own parameters. Freedom lies in being able to consciously choose which universe to experience based on resonance with your highest vision. You become the conscious author of your experience, not the character trapped in the script. This is the true meaning of leaving this world that Goddard emphasized. Not physically escaping to another place, but transcending fixed identification with any single world. You remain physically present while operating from a consciousness that does not belong to any specific universe, but navigates freely between all of them. Understanding intellectually the four-dimensional nature of consciousness is just the first step. True transformation requires consistent practice of dimensional navigation, and this practice requires specific tools. Meditation constitutes the fundamental method for consciously accessing the fourth dimension, but not just any meditation. It needs to be specifically directed to develop the capacity to think four-dimensionally, to dissolve the walls of the mental cube, to fold psychological time-space, and to inhabit multiple temporal coordinates. Every change begins with the understanding of your role as co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We have developed a set of audio tools to help you access this higher state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click on the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me,"